The current one is supposed to end on 12th of May, but we believe it may be extended with some relaxations after that. One of the sectors that was affected was the port and logistics services. But the government realized that the port and logistics services is one of the essential ones that needs to be kept alive in order for us to move the essential goods. And therefore, under the government gazette, the ports and logistics were allowed to operate, albeit with a few restrictions. We had to reduce the number of people on the ground. We had to ensure that there were health restrictions that were strictly observed. And only essential goods were allowed to be moved from the port. And after some time, we of course had some cargo buildup within the port. We had a lot of non-essential goods which are building up, import goods, and we realized that if we let that continue, then the port would have become congested. And therefore, we applied to the Ministry of Transport, and we managed to get periodic release periods. So over the last 6 weeks, we have got 4 release periods, which have helped the port clear some of the imported goods. Yeah, well, one of the conditions that was imposed by the government was the port was to operate on very strict health precautions. And that is where we had to reduce our workforce to 50%. We had to ensure that all staff that were coming in had carried proper IDs with authorization letters from their employers. And this is what we have learned over the last 6 weeks, that hygiene was the most important thing that we were emphasizing on. And therefore, we had to make sure that all workforce within the port area was properly attired with the right PPE. And if we look at what we did before the COVID-19, of course, we had our safeguards in the port. If we'll take an example of the checkpoint, we used to do it only for security reasons, but going forward on post-COVID-19, we will probably have to improve this by including a lot of health screening, temperature screening, to make sure the people who are coming in are properly attired for work in the port. Secondly is the attire and the gears that they were using. Previously, we were only looking at the safety part of it, but now they all have to be wearing face masks, and we have got hand sanitizers placed at almost every strategic location where the port workers are able to clean themselves up whenever they have to. Close contact is something that has to be avoided. This is something that it is a practice that has been ongoing in many sectors. We meet at our workplaces to discuss, to exchange ideas, to make, and some of our work also involves teamwork. But going forward, I think that is no longer possible. The safe distance is anything between 1 meter and 2 meters now. So 6 feet is the word that we keep hearing. And this is where we have drummed into our port staff that they have to keep away from each other at least 6 feet. But there are also some technology that we hope to acquire soon. We hear there are some bracelets, electronic bracelets, which are able to be worn around the wrists, and this will give us some idea of if the distancing between 2 persons are below the minimal allowed, and is supposed to trigger off an alarm. In terms of communication interaction, again, one-to-one interaction was very common. Going forward, I think we can't do that anymore. We are exactly on that today. We are doing video calls. We are doing video conferencing. And I think this is a culture that we need to inculcate among our colleagues and our workforce as well. Group discussions are out of the question for the time being. Thanks to Skype, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Google Duo, we have technology to help us out. Seminars will be replaced by a webinar. Training, I don't think we'll be able to do group training, and not at least in big groups, but it's going to be online training, probably solo, and this is where self-study will be very important. In terms of ports and logistics operation, we used to, although we used to have, or although we have a lot of electronic systems running at the moment in the ports, but we still do have counter services operating. This is because of, in case there are any issues with electronic systems, then we allow manual declarations to come in. At the same time, there are also counters open for inquiries and manual submission. I think over the last 6 weeks, we have made it very clear to the port community that we will no longer open counter services, and we have gone fully on electronic platforms, and surprisingly this has worked very well for us now. We have got only the odd inquiries by phone, so I think it is about time that we push this full force, and I think we will not have much problems moving forward to completely stop the counter services. Payments, we still accepted checks and cash payments to a certain extent, maybe about 10% of our transactions. But again, over the last 6 weeks, we have been working very well with online payments. In crisis, I think we are able to adapt and adopt a lot of other things, and this has worked very well. Registration of companies, again, I think we were still allowing a lot of manual registrations for people to operate within the port. We have online systems. I think we're going to make sure that the online systems are going to be used strictly in the future, including licensing, applications and submissions. That too has already been online for some time, but this is a good phase for us to discourage people from coming up to our counters to submit manual applications. So what do we do going forward? It's all about change management. The conditions, the circumstances do not allow us to operate as what we used to do before. So what's going to be the future? It is going to be the new normal post-COVID-19, remote working, virtual meetings, discussions, online connection, digital database and platforms. I think this is one of the most important areas. If we had been dragging our feet earlier, I think this is the time where we need to accelerate and speed up adopting these applications. And of course, this will allow us to make swift decisions from anywhere in the world. We don't really have to be sitting together to make such decisions. And lastly, this is what the future is. The most important thing, number one, is the work culture and mindset. Many of us are creatures of habit. We have been doing things as what we normally are used to. And this is where we need to change. And I think the management policies have to be clearly written out in the future to ensure that the work culture is very strictly laid out for the workforce to comply. Definition of outputs and work order has to be clearly laid out as well. Skills training, ICT will be the platform after this. I think we are going to use information technology to enhance our knowledge and information technology. And I think that cannot be delayed. Manual work orders are no longer applicable. We'll have to go towards using iPads, our PDAs, our handphones to receive instructions. And this is where digitalization will start moving. And lastly, we have to stay safe and healthy. I think this is the culture that we really have to transform ourselves, and every second of the day, safety of health, safety of ourselves, health issues and hygiene has to be the hallmark that we all have to prescribe to. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That's my short presentation of slides. Anthony, back to you.
Thank you very much, Captain. Before we go to the next speaker, could you say a few words, perhaps half a minute or so, on the impact of the virus on the volumes in the port of Port Klang?
Okay.
Has it gone up? Has it gone down? What has been the impact as far as you can see?
We have seen some reduction in the volumes, but it has not been as it has not been as bad as what we initially thought. We used to do close to about a million plus TEUs, 60% of transshipment, 40% of local cargo. In March, when we started the lockdown, we did not see much changes. The first quarter of the year was almost quite similar to last year. But moving into April, we saw the transshipment starting to slide down. But surprisingly, the local indigenous cargo held on. We still were doing the figures that we saw in March as well. But coming into the last 2 weeks of April, I think we're looking at a double-digit decline in terms of transshipment. But that is natural. I think the consumption has gone down all over the world. We are feeding towards the Asia-Pacific area. This is a huge populated area in our neighboring countries. And this is where once the consumption goes down, I think the demand for movement of goods, generally demand for manufactured goods is going to go down, and therefore movement of goods are restricted. So I would think that going forward towards May or June, we will probably be seeing a deterioration of the transshipment cargo. But we just hope that the local consumption at least will pick up. The local industries are allowed to come back online. Many of the industries have been have ceased operating. Automobile and industry is at a standstill now. Almost zero production, zero assembly. Most of the major manufacturing plants are shut down. But the good news is yesterday the government announced that all companies that were earlier giving approval to operate on limited basis now can ramp up their production to 100%. So they can bring in their workforce back to 100%. They can start productivity on 100%. And this is where we are hoping that some of the backlog of the imported cargo that is still remaining in the port will start moving out. Thank you, Anthony.